Hi, all. This is Rio. I'm the humanities guy here at Hamilton Education. Today, we are going to be looking at the reading and writing sections of College Board Test 391. The reading and writing sections are combined, so we will be going through them simultaneously, but I will let you all know which is a reading question and which is a writing question. Um, I'd say let's get right into it. But again, this is, as you can see here, College Board Test 391. We're going to start in just a moment with question one. Okay, so we're starting here with question one, which is the first of several vocab questions here on our first module. The vocab questions increase in difficulty as we go through them. So this first one is is probably the easiest of the vocab questions that we have. Number one, former astronaut Ellen Ochoa says that although she doesn't have a definite idea of when it might happen, then there's this underlined area. This is where we're going to want to insert a word. She's something that humans will someday need to be able to live in other environments than those found on Earth. This conjecture informs her interest in future research missions to the moon. Okay, first things first, shout out Ellen Ochoa. You know why we do that? SD, San Diego. Ellen Ochoa is from La Mesa area. She went to Grossmont High School in the Grossmont Union High School District, which is where I went to high school. So shout out Ellen Ochoa. Once we have gotten that very, very important thing out of the way, now let's look at what vocab word we have to fulfill this. A little hint with these vocab questions is very often you will see a synonym in the text of the question right after. So we have this word conjecture here. If you happen to know what conjecture means, it in fact is exactly synonymous with the correct answer up here. So if you were to know that, you could get the correct answer. However, I'm going to assume that perhaps you do not know what conjecture means if you're missing this question. So now we will pivot to the process of elimination, right? One of our first answer choices here, demands. She demands that humans will someday need. Does not make sense as demanding something in the future, what we need to do. This all seems very hypothetical, right? Okay, C, we have doubts. You notice I'm skipping B. C as doubts. Doubts does not work here because doubts is about the opposite of what we might have. While doubts creates a logical sentence, right? She doesn't have an idea of when it might happen. She doubts that humans will someday need to be able to live in other environments. It doesn't exactly make a logical sentence, rather. It makes a logical clause. The clause, she doubts that humans will someday need to be able to live in other environments than those found on Earth. That's perfectly understandable. However, these are word and context. These are vocab embedded within text. You have to know what's going on in the text. So for this question, doubts doesn't make any sense when it says that it may need to happen in the future. So we can get rid of doubts. Now, our trickiest answer choice to get rid of is establishes. Establishes does actually kind of work in this sentence. However, the reason why I prefer speculates and why speculates is the correct answer is because of conjecture. Okay, conjecture and establishes don't work as synonyms in the same way that speculates and conjecture work as synonyms. Speculates and conjecture both mean it's something of a guess. It's an educated guess, It's a guess that comes from experience and expertise, but nonetheless, it is something that is not definitive. So therefore, our answer for number 1 is B. All right, here's question 2 of module 1. We have another vocab question. I'll read the whole passage, which is passage, to find where we're looking for the context. Following the principles of community-based participatory research, tribal nations and research institutions are equal partners in health studies conducted on reservations. A collaboration between the Crow Tribe and Montana State University, blank, something there, this model. Tribal citizens worked alongside scientists to design the methodology and continue to assist in data collection. Okay, so I mentioned this in question 1. I'm going to mention it in all vocab questions here. There is usually a giveaway word that demonstrates what we are looking for our vocab word. So we see that this first sentence here is kind of the first example. It's sort of the general of a partnership between a health institution, research institution, and tribal nations. So this is the general, our first, and then our second sentence demonstrates this exact circumstance. So we have, in this situation, a general discussion about a model of a participatory partnership between research institutions and tribal nations, and then an example of this taking place between the Crow Tribe and Montana State University, which are respectively a tribal nation and research institution. So we're looking for a word that demonstrates that this second sentence is an example of the general that comes first. Okay? So we have in the first circumvents. Circumvents does not work. Circumvents means to go around something, to avoid something. You might be able to pick that up if you don't know this word through CIRC, which, like circle, means round, going around. So circumvents means to avoid. This doesn't avoid that model. It rather provides an example of that model. Eclipses, like we would see if the sun is eclipsed by the moon or the planet or whatever actually eclipses the sun, to all you science kids out there, is in when something supersedes or is bigger or overshadows something else, goes beyond something else. This doesn't go beyond this model. This example does not go beyond the model that was described, so it wouldn't eclipse it. Fabricates is when we make something. So fabricates kind of has two connotations. In the first instance, fabricates can mean just create, right? Like from a factory. Having a prefabricated home is something you might have heard of before. It's basically like a kind of like, like a trailer home. But fabricates can also have the connotation of lies, right? It's something that was made up. However, in this case, neither of these connotations work. This example doesn't create the model. It's an example of the model. And this example also isn't a fabrication. It isn't a lie. So we're left with what's pretty clearly here related to the word example. Exemplifies, which means demonstrates in every single way, right? So if, if Victor Wembanyama exemplifies the perfect basketball build, he's really tall, This example exemplifies this model in that it is a partnership, just like the model suggests we should have a partnership. So their answer choice for this should be D. Here we are on the third question of the first module. We have another vocab question. The parasitic daughter plant increases its reproductive success by flowering at the same time as the host plant it has attached to. In 2020, Jianqing Wu and his colleagues determined that the tiny daughter achieves this something with its host by absorbing and utilizing a protein the host produces when it is about to flower. So this is a classic example of on the SAT, these vocab questions very often have a lot of information that you don't exactly need, but some really crucial key words, okay, that basically provide a definition or a synonym for the vocab word that we're looking for. So in this case, we have kind of the definition of the vocab word we're looking for here. Flowering at the same time as the host plant. So this parasite, the daughter plant, is successful by flowering at the same time. So we're looking for something that connotes the same time. So synchronization, when things are in sync, if you've ever heard that phrase, that's in synchronization. That's a shortening of the word sync. That means at the same time. Hibernation, of course, means to basically be dormant. You know, bears go into hibernation over the winter, meaning that they sleep a lot and they don't need to eat, all these other things. Hibernation isn't something that this plant does. It's flowering. Achieves this prediction. A prediction doesn't work here either. It's not a prediction. None of these really make any sense to me. I believe these other answer choices are not very strong. I think if you're missing this question, you're likely running into a problem where you don't exactly know what synchronization means, and you're afraid of choosing an answer choice that you do not have a complete understanding of that word for. I would say if you can get rid of other answer choices, we can still be confident choosing an answer that we don't entirely know if there is no sensible argument for any of the other answer choices. If something is wrong in an answer choice, then the answer choice doesn't work. We can't choose a flawed answer. B, C, and D are all mortally flawed. We also have synchronization being the term defined by two things happening at the same time. Make sure your watches are in sync is what you'll see in some 90s spy movie. So with that, number 3, we have A. So now we have question 4 of module 1. Another vocab question, one of the 5 on this test. Each of these, of course, are standalone. Given that the conditions in binary star systems should make planetary formation nearly impossible, it is not surprising that the existence of planets in such systems has lacked some sort of explanation. We're looking for some type, a descriptor of explanation. Roman Rafikov and Kendron Silsby shed light on the subject when they used modeling to determine a complex set of factors that could support planets' development. So, as is often the case on these, we have a bit of a context here, but as we get further in vocab questions, as opposed to questions 1, 2, and 3, 4 is a little more difficult because we don't have really an exact synonym, nor do we have an exact definition for the word that we're looking for elsewhere in this passage, this mini passage, which is, of course, 2 sentences, not much of a passage. Nonetheless, we can, through the context, infer what word fits the context. If you made a mistake on this answer, on this question, I'm presuming that the answer choice you chose, you were going by the colloquial definition, okay? So first, I want to get rid of C. C is a classic example of an opposite distractor. It is the famous sort of thing that you hear about in like sixth grade grammar, which is a double negative. It has lacked an inconclusive explanation. Lacking an inconclusive explanation would be having a conclusive explanation, right? If it had a conclusive explanation, we wouldn't need someone to shed light on what particular circumstances allow for this thing to exist. So we can get rid of an inconclusive. If you didn't read the word lacked, you might have chose C if you're moving a little too quickly. Okay, I would presume that C is a smart student's silly error where you're smacking your forehead like that. D, unbiased. An unbiased explanation would suggest we're in the realm of politics, which, while there is probably intersections of politics and astrophysics and planetary science, in this case, not really. Biased, so an unbiased explanation would be an explanation that's lacking there isn't a unbiased explanation, right? Bias is, of course, when you have an inclination to one thing based off of either your preconceived notions or something like that. Doesn't really work here. So now we're between A and B, a discernible and straightforward. We really want to think about definitions here. The definition of discernible is actually whether we can discern it. It means, is it something that we can see? Something that is hard to discern is something that is hard to see physically. Okay. You want to make sure that the signs on the freeway are discernible to all drivers, right? That's why freeway signs are gigantic, the size of like a garage door. Discernible has migrated to mean understandable. It's kind of become used to mean understandable. However, straightforward means understandable, right? Like it actually means that it isn't, you don't have to go to a tertiary definition in order to get there. We also have something of, rather than synonyms, we have antonyms. Okay. Complex and straightforward are antonyms. By saying that it is lacked a straightforward explanation, we only have a very complex set of factors that could support this. These antonyms show that these are antonyms, and we have this word lacked. We're able to see, these are together. So if you chose A, you're likely really smart and you outsmarted yourself. If you chose C, you likely are really smart and didn't give yourself enough time to answer this smartly. Okay, so for question 5, we have another vocab. It's the final vocab from module 1 for this test. This is apparently probably going to be or should be the most difficult of our questions. Seminole/Muskogee director Sterling Harjo, Something Television's tendency to situate native characters in the distant past. Excuse me. This rejection is evident in his series Reservation Dogs, which revolves around teenagers who dress in contemporary styles and whose dialogue is laced with current slang, which completes the text, which word choice completes the text with the most logical or precise word. So even though that this is the 5th and more difficult, apparently, it does something really nice for us. It has a very clear synonym. It tells us what the word you're using here is given again, just the idea or the meaning of this word is given again via another word later on. Right there. This rejection. So we're just looking for a word which is a direct synonym with rejection. Okay. So as it happens, repudiates and rejection are very close synonyms. So that's our correct answer, but I'll also give why the other answers are incorrect. To repudiate something, to reject something, is to repudiate something is to basically say to upend something, to say that something is wrong, to do the opposite. So he's doing the opposite of this tendency, okay, in the distant past. He's repudiating it by doing something new. Proclaims is just to basically loudly demonstrate or claim, right? Something that prophets do. While this doesn't not work in that first clause, he could declare that this situation was true. It isn't synonymous with rejection, and it doesn't work in the context of the sentence as a whole, especially what comes after the colon. Foretells means to look into the future. Obviously, fore is forward-looking. So to foretell something is to say that's what's going on in the future, when it's not. He's saying that this is something that's been happening. It is chronic to television, chronic meaning habitual, always going. It's not in the future. And then recants is something that we get from like the olden days when witches were being burned and drowned. To recant is to give something up, right? It is to take something back, take back a belief or a thought or something that you had previously given, to say it explicitly. So perhaps it would work if he had been doing that before and now he, recants his idea that the best way to make native TV is by putting those characters in the past. That's obviously not what's going on here. I think if you're missing this question, you may be like, if you missed question 3, are unsure what repudiates means and are choosing a word that you feel like you know a little bit better because you're uncomfortable choosing an answer choice you don't know. But that's not the strategy we want to be taking here, right? We want to be getting rid of answer choices and choosing ones which are correct. Okay, so now we're looking at question 6 of module 1. This question is asking about the function of a sentence within a larger text. Let's read this text. It comes from Edith Wharton's 1905 novel, The House of Mirth. The character Lily Bart and someone else are walking through a park. Lily had no real intimacy with nature. That means she had no real connection or understanding. But she had a passion for the appropriate and could be keenly sensitive to a scene which was the fitting background of her own sensations. The landscape outspread below her seemed an enlargement of her present mood, and she found something of herself in its calmness, its breadth, its long, free reaches. On nearer slopes, the sugar maples waved like pyres of light. Lower down was a massing of gray orchards, and here and there the lingering green of an oak grove. Okay, so we don't really need to know what a liquid or a sugar maple is. We don't really need to know any of these particular, very specific details. We need to understand, what is this underlined sentence doing? Not just what happens or what it is. We want to understand, why is it there? What does it do for this text? So, A, it creates a detailed image of the physical setting of the scene. I would say this final sentence might be true for A, but this, we don't actually really get any details about the physical setting. We just see some sort of combination of how she feels and what the landscape is, that there's some synthesis or symbiosis between the two. So we can get rid of A. B, it establishes that a character is experiencing an internal conflict. Okay, for one, calmness, breath, and long free reaches doesn't really sound like an internal conflict. But I think that B also exemplifies one of the more worrisome things that we can do on the SAT, which is treat the SAT like we treat an AP Lit kind of class, which is to read really deeply and to make tenuous claims and tenuous connections. That's too far, nor is it actually borne out by the text. So we can get rid of B. It makes an assertion that the next sentence expands upon. An assertion is to make a claim. I guess there's a little bit of a claim in this sentence. It seemed an enlargement of her present mood. But does the next sentence expand upon that assertion or that claim? No. The next sentence just talks about what is there in the more physical sense. So we've gotten rid of A, B, and C, which leaves us just with D. So we can be confident with our answer choice D, as is right now, but we want to make sure that D also makes sense, that there's nothing glaringly wrong with D that would make us reconsider. It illustrates an idea that is introduced in the previous sentence. So this is the idea in the previous sentence. A scene that seemed to be a fitting background to her own sensations. Now, sensations isn't typically nowadays used in this form, which is why this might be tricky if you missed this. You might not think of sensations to mean mood or feeling. Sensations are more like, I don't know, there were commercials in like the 2000s about 5-gum. Made it seem like going like, whoa, like that's a sensation, whoa. But rather, in this case, sensations, mood, feelings, that's what this is all. Those are all kind of synonymous in this context. So our answer choice is B. Okay, we have question 7 from module 1 here. A real nice little tidbit that could be used by dystopian HR managers and corporate people to destroy the sensibilities of others. A study by a team, including finance professor, finance involved, Madhu Veeraraghavan, suggests that exposure to sunshine during the workday can lead to overly optimistic behavior. We do not want that. No more sunshine. Horrible that we gave that to people. Using data spanning from 1994 to 2010 for a set of US companies, the team compared over 29,000 annual earnings forecasts to the actual earnings later reported by these companies. Okay, this is underlined. What is the function of the underlined sentence in the structure of the text? So this is a very specific kind of function question. It's not just asking, what does this sentence do? It's asking, what does this sentence do for the structure of this tiny little thing we're reading? That the College Board is using to corrupt your brains and make you evil, because they're evil. The team found that the greater the exposure to sunshine at work in the 2 weeks before a manager submitted an earnings forecast, the more the manager's forecast exceeded what the company actually earned that year. Okay, so basically it's saying all companies should be in Seattle, and we should be put in a dungeon before we make an earnings forecast, at least for 2 weeks, it seems. So what is this underlined sentence? The one that kind of outlines what's going on here, how it was done. What is the purpose and the structure? So to summarize the results of the team's analysis. Okay, that is exactly what goes on there. That's not the underlined portion, okay? So this as a whole kind of summarizes the analysis. It shows things, but A is not what's going on with that underlined in the structure of this. B, to present a specific example that illustrates the study's findings. That would be something of an anecdote. We don't have that here. We have 29,000 annual earnings forecasts. That is not a specific example, right? We would need one company doing this somewhere showing, well, last year we had, our people in well-lit rooms and now we put them in a cubby and they're more accurate. C, to explain part of the methodology used in the team study. Okay, methodology means method, right? Don't allow little things make this tougher. So we understand that. This is correct. This is correct because it explains how they came to their conclusions, what they used in their study to, produce any sort of data or what have you. Let's call it a challenge. There's no challenge presented here unless the challenge is them finding their own souls. So, question 7, Madhu should be C. All right, question 8 here on module 1. We have a command of evidence question. We're just looking for what actually is going on in this passage. According to the text, what is true about mother? Now, this is from 1906, so we might encounter a little bit of weird language, something that we're not familiar with, but we're not going to let that distract us from finding what is true about mother. Okay. Mother did not spend all her time in paying dull visits to dull ladies, in sitting dully at home, waiting for dull ladies to pay visits to her. She was almost always there, ready to play with the children and read to them and help them to do their home lessons, which I presume is homework. Besides this, she used to write stories for them while they were at school and read them aloud after tea. And she always made up funny pieces of poetry for their birthdays and for other great occasions. So mother isn't stuck up and caring about adults. She cares about these kids. All right. What is true about mother? A is something that we cannot get from this text. This is a classic example of going too far with our inference from the text. We don't want to read this and make AP Lit or AP Lang type assumptions, something that would make an AP Lit teacher excited. We don't want to assume, well, she didn't spend all her time doing that because she didn't get enough visits. And maybe she would want to have more visits because that would increase her social class. And we can tell that she's not of the highest social class or, whatever. A, we don't have enough information. B, birthdays are her favorite special occasion. Okay. Her favorite special occasion, again, goes too far. She does have something to do with birthdays here, right? We can tell maybe she likes birthdays and these, but it seems like other great occasions also get the same amount of care or attention. And how it doesn't say that they're her favorite. And when it says according to the text, we're looking for something that is absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt true. Something that, it must be like irrefutable. Okay. Not just plausible. C, this is kind of a boring answer, but it's the correct one. She creates stories and poems for her children. Yep, that's what it says. She writes stories and poems. There we go, according to the text. D, reading to her children is her favorite activity. Again, that goes too far. We can't infer that much. Therefore, for this question 8, we have to resolve the C. Okay, so this question is definitely, question 9, module 1, is definitely one of our weirder questions here. We are being asked to finish a poem based upon a claim. Okay. To You is the 1956 poem by Walt Whitman. In the poem, Whitman suggests that readers whom he addresses directly, that's important there, have not fully understood themselves writing something. Okay, so we need a direct address. All of these have direct address, so that doesn't really help. Which shows that they do not understand themselves. Now, you have not known what you are. You have slumbered upon yourself all your life. Your eyelids have been the same as closed most of the time. This sounds pretty much like you were suggesting someone not fully understanding themselves, right? You have not known what you are all your life. Your eyes have been closed to yourself. You've slept on yourself you have slumbered upon yourself into modern speech. They're sleeping on you. You're sleeping on you. B. So this means I like A. Let's see if anything is better. These immense meadows, these interminable rivers, you are immense and interminable as they. Wow, that's gorgeous. That doesn't have anything to do with self-understanding or self-knowledge, right? This is just saying that you are as immense and big and unending as a river and a meadow. You are the same. Okay. This is just a metaphor. C, I should have made my way straight to you long ago. I should have blabbed nothing but you. I should have chanted nothing but you. All right, this is maybe heartbreaking, but this is about maybe him not understanding what he should have done, but this isn't saying anything about self-understanding. D, I will leave all and come and make the hymns of you. None has understood you, but I understand you. This is tricky here. Okay. None has understood you, but I understand you. Would we say that yourself is included in that none? No. All right. It also isn't in the direct address, that part. So answer has to be A. D, though it has, this is sort of what we would call a recycled language distractor. Though the word understand is in D and in our question, A actually talks about self-understanding better than D does, even though D has the exact word. Therefore, A. Okay, so now we are on Module 1, Question 10. We have a question asking about which finding, if true, would most directly support the student's claim. So this is basically asking about main idea. That's where you might see that's how you might see this question classified by the College Board itself or on Khan Academy if you're doing that on your own as a supplement to this Hamilton stuff. Let's read the passage and see if we can find a claim. Born in 1891 to a Quechua-speaking family in the Andes Mountains of Peru, Martin Chambi is today considered to be one of the most renowned figures of Latin American photography. Okay, it could be that claim. In a paper for an art history class, a student claims that Chambi's photographs have considerable ethnographic value. Okay, maybe we don't know what ethnographic means, but study of ethnicity. In his work, Chambi was able to capture diverse elements of Peruvian society, representing his subjects with both dignity and authenticity. So this means this is everything that comes after this dash is an elaboration. Okay, this is a little bit actually from grammar. Because of that, we know that everything that comes after this dash is describing the last part of the clause prior to the dash, prior to the beginning of the elaboration. That means this is what ethnographic value is, capturing diverse elements of Peruvian society. So let's see what demonstrates this. So we know that A is the correct answer because you took this test, but Chambi took many commissioned portraits of wealthy Peruvians. Okay, so this is wealthy Peruvians, but also produced hundreds of images carefully documenting the peoples, sites, and customs of indigenous communities of the Andes. Okay, now some presumptions here. It's wealthy versus indigenous, which is kind of funny. Classic College Board. Nonetheless, we do have a pretty clear example of diverse elements, dignity, and authenticity. So we have authenticity here. We have this, and this is probably diversity. So that's why A is good. Let's see why everything else is bad. Okay. The photographs just demonstrate a high level of technical skill, as seen in a strategic use of illumination to create dramatic shadow and light. Okay. So B is possibly true. It says it's true, right? Nothing wrong with B. But does this support the idea of capturing diverse elements? No, this is a technical rather than kind of like approach-based discussion. So we can get rid of B. C, during his lifetime, Chambi was known and celebrated both within and outside his native Peru, as his work was published in places like Argentina, Spain, and Mexico. Again, this is very interesting. It's likely true. Probably shows that his work was successful. If you chose this answer choice, you might be looking for what, um, you know, maybe the value ascribed by others. However, this doesn't really talk about his authenticity or the dignity or what have you. Many inauthentic artists have become popular. Finally, D, some of the people and places he photographed have long been popular subjects for Peruvian photographers. That it really has nothing to do with the ethnographic value of his work. So we've got to go with A. Okay, so we're moving on to question 11 here from Module 1. We have our first figure-based question here of the College Board SAT. There are a handful of these on each of the College Board tests. I have found with these questions that they are often a little more straightforward than we expect. There's a lot of distracting information that can sometimes lead us to distractors in our answer choices. Here we have the credited film output of 4 different actors from the early days of cinema, 1910s and 1920s. Here are the 4 individuals. Here's their acted. And then importantly, the number of films that they are known and commonly credited for, which is a very specific way of saying films that they appeared in. So we're going to see that this specificity becomes increasingly important once we look at the text. So let's read through this mini text here. Some researchers studying indigenous actors and filmmakers in the United States have turned their attention to the early days of cinema, particularly the 1910s and 1920s, when people like James Young Deere, Dark Cloud, Edwin Carew, and Lillian St. Cyr, known professionally as Red Wing, were involved in one way or another with numerous films. As you can see, these are those same 4 individuals here. In fact, so many films and associated records for this era have been lost that counts of these 4 figures output should be taken as bare minimums rather than totals. That is kind of our most important clause in this text. That's why it's highlighted there. Okay, so we have another graph question here. This is the second from Module 1. We have Module 1, question 12. Juvenile plants found growing on bare ground and in patches of vegetation for 5 species. So, as is typical of these graphing or figure questions, in this case it's a table, we don't want to get too lost trying to understand what exactly is going on. We just want to get at the outset from the table itself. I kind of think that oftentimes the text is more important. But just looking at the table, we see that we have 5 species of juvenile plants and how many of them are growing in either patches of vegetation or on bare ground. And then it shows the percentage of the total that are found in patches of vegetation as opposed to on bare ground. So Alicia Montesinos Navarro, read that as horribly as I could, Isabel Storr, and Rocio Perez Barales recently examined several plots within a diverse plant community in southeast Spain. The researchers calculated somehow that if individual plants were randomly distributed on this particular landscape, only about 15% would be found with other plants in patches of vegetation. They counted the number of juvenile plants of 5 species. Okay, so this is their hypothesis, right? Then they have their methodology. So a lot of times with these science-based texts, we want to kind of break it down into their question or hypothesis, their method, and then their results, and then their conclusions from those results. So the method is they counted the number of juvenile plants, 5 species growing in patches of vegetation, and the number growing alone on bare ground, and compared those numbers to what would be expected if those plants were randomly distributed. Okay, there's our method. Put an M for method. I'm going to put a Q, a Q for question. On these results, they claim that plants of these species that grow in close proximity to other plants gain an advantage at an early developmental state. Okay, this is our results, R. All right, so if you're reading through this and you don't quite understand what's going on here, you might want to take a moment to pause and think, what did this say? How can I summarize this in a simple way? Which would be as follows. These plants are at a rate higher than expected, growing in patches with other plants. This higher than expected rate shows that they probably are gaining a benefit from growing with other plants. That's what these three are expecting. At least at the developmental stage, because of course these are juvenile plants. So, which choice best describes data from the table that supports the researcher's claim? Okay, so we're not just looking for something that is true of the table. We are looking for something that supports their claim. So A, less than 75% of juvenile plants were growing in patches of vegetation for all of them. That's totally true. That's true, yet it's wrong. Why would it be wrong? Well, this has nothing to do, 75%, with growing in patches of vegetation, has nothing to do with their claim, nor with their hypothesis, right? Because their hypothesis is the opposite. They have 15% would be in patches, 75% would be, well, actually it would be 85% would be in bare ground. Yeah, it's a true but irrelevant distractor. The species with the greatest number of juvenile plants growing in patches of vegetation was H. stoechas. That's just not true in the table. For these two plants that I will not attempt, the percentage of juvenile plants growing in patches of vegetation was less than what would be expected if plants were randomly distributed. That's an opposite distractor, right? If you misinterpreted this to be 85% and they're being found at less than 85%, maybe you would choose C. And then D, for each species, the percentage of juvenile plants growing in patches of vegetation was substantially higher than would be expected if they were randomly distributed. So I don't know exactly what substantially higher should mean, but if they're expecting 15% and it's a range of 52 to 59% for all of these plants, well, we see a pretty compelling data point to prove or to support the claim that growing in patches of vegetation confers a developmental advantage to these juvenile plants. If you miss this question, it's likely that you're moving too quickly and you're not allowing yourself to try to interpret what the text is, or you're getting lost in distractors of what's going on here. You're making it more complicated than it actually needs to be. Okay, so we have another question 13 from Module 1, which is asking about support, right? So we're asking about the function of data, and we're being asked to understand the researcher's hypothesis. So our first goal in reading this text is to understand what is the researcher's hypothesis, and then from understanding that hypothesis, our next goal is to figure out, well, what then would support this hypothesis? So reading through, in the mountains of Brazil, 2 plants in the particular family established themselves on soilless, nutrient-poor patches of quartzite rock. Ecologist Anna Abrao and Patricia de Britacosta used microscopic analysis to determine that the roots of B. tomentosa and B. macrantha, that was what was up here, which grow directly into the quartzite, have clusters of fine hairs near the root tip. Further analysis indicate that these hairs secrete both malic and citric acids. Okay, none of this yet has anything to do with a hypothesis. This is all just simply factual. Now we get to the hypothesis. This is the thing that we really need to understand. The researchers hypothesize that the plants depend on dissolving underlying rock with these acids. Okay, so part of the hypothesis is that we are dissolving underlying rock. Additionally, the process creates channels for continued growth and releases phosphates, which provide the vital nutrient phosphorus. So there are two parts, two claims, two ideas in this hypothesis. It isn't just that they create channels. Well, there's actually kind of three. They dissolve the underlying rock for two purposes, to create channels and release phosphates. So when we're looking for support for this hypothesis, we need something that proves that they both create channels for growth and that the release of these acids is to, one, create channels for growth, and to, two, release phosphates. Okay. So what do we have here? A, other species are found in terrains with more soil but have root structures similar to these things. That wouldn't make sense. A would disprove the hypothesis. Why? Well, if this is true, if they have similar structures, they do similar things, but they grow in soil, why would these roots be needing to create channels for themselves? However, though, root structures and root function are a little different. It seems to be just irrelevant. A seems to be irrelevant. Though these species both secrete these acids, each species produces the acid in different proportions. What does that have to do with their hypothesis? If this were true, cool, awesome. But what does that actually have to do with the claim that the researchers are trying to make sense of? Nothing. C, the roots of tomentosa and macrantha carve new entry points into rocks, even when cracks in the surface are readily available. Okay, this is a really interesting option. It's the correct option because you took the test. You probably know this by now. Why is this so compelling? Well, this shows that even if they are creating channels, even if the acids serve the purpose of creating channels, if they have channels, they still carve new entry points into the rocks. So this isn't the only function of these acids. They also serve a vital function of releasing phosphates. So C suggests that there is a dual function of these acids. D, let's see if this one is worse than C. Tomentosa and macrantha thrive even when transferred to the surfaces of rocks that do not contain phosphates. That is a distracting opposite distractor because they need phosphates. If they thrive when they do not have phosphates, it suggests that maybe they didn't ever need the vital nutrient phosphorus. Okay, so our answer choice is C. Okay, for 14 here, we are finishing the text, completing the text. This is a kind of a question which is asking us to understand the main idea of the text and the function really of the last sentence. This, like other SAT passages, is written in a rather ponderous style. Notice that we have two sentences here. Two gigantic sentences. This final sentence has has multiple clauses and many, many non-essential phrases. It is a doozy, poorly written sentence. Um, that's hopefully what the SAT, the College Board, these evil little demons are hoping is that this bogs you down in the weeds so that you're unable to really like make sense of what's going on because you're so stuck on reading such a long sentence, right? That's why English teachers used to give out Charles Dickens to read because his sentences would go on like multiple pages. Um, but let's just read the text, see if we can make some sense of it, okay? Herbivorous sauropod dinosaurs could grow more than 100 feet long and weigh up to 80 tons. Okay. An important facet of these kind of questions is that we do not need to have any outside information for ourselves to know this sort of stuff, to answer this, okay? We don't need to know what sauropod dinosaurs are. We don't need to know that they're like the long-necked big dinosaurs. Everything we need to know is going to be in this text. So sauropods could grow more than 100 feet long and weigh up to 80 tons. And some researchers have attributed the evolution of sauropods to such massive sizes to increased plant production in this era, resulting from the high levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide during the Mesozoic. Okay, so this is the hypothesis that many have had, that these dinosaurs were able to get so big because there are just, there's a lot of plants. However, okay, well, this is probably going to be contrasting information. There is no evidence of significant spikes in carbon dioxide levels coinciding with the relevant periods of sauropod evolution, such as when the first large sauropods appeared, when several sauropod lineages underwent further evolution towards gigantism, or when sauropods reached their maximum known sizes. So, by saying however, we need to understand the role of that transitional adverb. However is suggesting something will contrast, right? Yet, however. It's kind of their function, right? We all typically understand this. So, however, and then they list the evidence that disproves the initial claim that researchers had, which attributed these big dinosaurs to big plants. So now we get this, suggesting that blank. We're looking for something, therefore, that analyzes or confirms, clarifies all of the information that was listed previously in this sentence, all the information that was listed in this clause. Which choice most logically completes the text? So fluctuations in atmospheric carbon dioxide affected different sauropod lineages differently. This is just a kind of non sequitur. It doesn't really have any relationship, right? B, the evolution of larger body sizes in sauropods did not depend on increased carbon dioxide. Okay, that is exactly what we're looking for. This refutes or repudiates, to use a word from earlier in this test, the claim that researchers had previously made. C, atmospheric, let's get rid of C and D nonetheless. C, atmospheric carbon dioxide was higher when the largest known lived than it was when they first appeared. One, that isn't true, or that we wouldn't know that to be true. Secondly, that kind of does not logically line up with this claim, which is seeking to repudiate the earlier claim. And D probably would not have evolved if atmospheric carbon dioxide had been even slightly higher. That's an opposite distractors. So we are left with B. Okay, so we have one final question here. Question 15 on the reading section of Module 1. After this, we move into the writing section. Of course, these are combined. Question 15, Module 1, we have another logical completion of the text. Okay. We don't want to get too lost. We want to make sure we're staying exactly with where we're looking. Let's take a look at this. In documents called judicial opinions, judges explain the reasoning behind their legal rulings. And in those explanations, they sometimes cite and discuss historical and contemporary philosophers. Okay. That's a statement, right? That's a clear statement. This is something that we wouldn't refute. Legal scholar and philosopher Anita L. Allen argues that while judges are naturally inclined to mention philosophers whose views align with their own positions, the strongest judicial opinions consider and rebut potential objections. So we have to know, what does rebut mean? Rebuttal. Okay, that means to refute or to go against. Okay, so it says, while there is an inclination to talk about things which align with their positions, the best opinions go and argue why the other perspective is wrong, right? Why the objection is wrong. Discussing philosophers whose views conflict with judges' views could therefore, okay, therefore is a really important word here. Just like with question 14, if you missed question 14, we have to really understand the function of a transitional adverb. In this case, therefore. Therefore is a proving word, right? Just like thus. Whatever comes after therefore has to kind of prove or be directly linked to what comes before therefore. So we want to say, how could this be a good thing, right? We want to say, talking about conflicting views would make their objection stronger, the same way that giving a potential objections or considering and rebutting potential objections makes opinions stronger. So which answer choice clarifies that? A, allow judges to craft judicial opinions without needing to consult philosophical works. Okay, that doesn't make any sense here because they're talking about consulting philosophical works right here. Okay, so we can get rid of A. B is correct, as we know. They help judges improve the arguments they put forward in their judicial opinions. Perfect. Okay, that perfectly says that by giving a opposing view, their opinion is made stronger, according to Anita Allen. Make judicial opinions more comprehensible to readers without legal or philosophical training. This also doesn't make sense, right? Seeing as that we're still considering philosophers. D, bring judicial opinions in line with views that are broadly held among philosophers. While this might be true, it's irrelevant to the claim that is being made. So we just want to find which one satisfies the idea of therefore, which one satisfies our claim. With that, we end the reading section of Module 1. All right, so Module 1, question 16 is the first of our writing section questions. It is a punctuation question. In ancient Greece, an Epicurean was a follower of Epicurus, a philosopher whose beliefs revolved around the pursuit of pleasure. Epicurus defined pleasure as the absence of pain in the body and of trouble in the soul. Okay. Positing that all life's virtues derived from this absence. So we know that the words are going to be soul and positing. We do not know what positing means. It means basically to claim. So he's claiming that all life's virtues derive from the absence of trouble or pain in the body or the soul. So first things first, well, we're talking about punctuation here, right? But we really need to know about something about clauses, okay? Everything after a period or semicolon would need to be an independent clause. An independent clause is something that could stand on its own as a sentence. Both C and D are not independent clauses. or well, both C and D are wrong because this is positing that all life's virtues derived from this absence are not independent clauses. For B, we would need for B to be an elaboration. Okay, so these are wrong because they're not independent. Okay. For B to be correct, we would need what comes after this colon to be an elaboration, meaning that it is defining or clarifying something that comes immediately previous in this sentence. But this does not define or clarify what it means to lack trouble in the soul or to lack pain in the body. Rather, it's a continuation and a building on this previous clause. So what we have here is a dependent clause. And what we are creating here is a complex sentence. Okay. The rest of this clause requires the previous clause, but it isn't clarifying what comes before it. It's an extension or it's going further. So that's why we'd go with A. In American English, commas and periods and most punctuation comes within the quotation marks. So that's why we have. That is why 16 is A. Okay, 17 is our second punctuation question, our second question on Module 1, writing overall. In 1937, Chinese-American screen actor Anna May Wong, who had portrayed numerous villains and secondary characters, but never a hero, finally got a starring role in Paramount Pictures' Daughter of Shanghai, a film that critic Stina Chin claims expanded the range of possibilities for Asian images on screen. Okay, so what we have here is a question of, do we have a non-essential phrase in this missing chunk or not? So non-essential phrases, remember, are created by a pair of commas, dashes, or parentheses. And there's something that we could remove from the sentence, from the clause, and the clause would still make sense, still function perfectly effectively. While non-essential phrases are not useless information, they're oftentimes really helpful information, they're nonetheless not essential. Okay? The same way a windshield on a car is not essential, but it's really nice to have. So A and B both create a non-essential phrase with the name of the critic, Stina Chin. Okay, this is a very common thing. And you might see this and think that A or B is correct because, well, we put names within a pair of commas. In the example of something along the lines of, my teacher, comma, Rio, comma, is a graduate of UC Berkeley. Okay. However, in this case, critic Stina Chin is the entire noun. Okay. A film that critic Stina Chin. Critic is almost like her title, right? It could be the equivalent of like Mrs. or Miss. So to say, let's just imagine it, a film that critic claims, right? If it's an A critic, sure. If it's an A critic, then we would need Stina Chin to be a non-essential phrase because that's clarifying who the critic is, but we don't need that. However, because critic Stina Chin is its entire noun here, we can get rid of A and B because we need that in there. So now we're between, do we put claims as a non-essential phrase or not? So if you chose D, which is incorrect, I'm thinking that you might have a false equivalence of pauses and commas. While it is true that commas create pauses, if you see a comma, you naturally pause. Not all pauses that you imagine are in the sentence require a comma. When I read this sentence earlier on, I kind of naturally just sort of paused. A film that critic Stina Chin claims expanded the range before the quote like that, right? I kind of paused before the quote. So you might think, oh, well, we need a comma before that. If you feel there's a pause, it doesn't mean, oh, I got to throw a comma in. Commas have very discrete, specific roles. They list, they create non-essential phrases, they separate independent clauses from each other from dependent clauses. They have a bunch of roles, and pause is not a role of comma. So our answer choice is C. If you're missing this, you might really want to review the roles of our punctuation. Okay, 18 is another grammar question. It is the third question of Module 1's writing test. We are asking how to conjugate a verb here. Okay, we're between the gerund, the present tense, the infinitive, and several other forms. Okay, so let's just read through this and go through it. So in 1637, the price of tulips skyrocketed in Amsterdam with single bulbs of rare varieties selling for up to the equivalent of $200,000 in today's US dollars. Some historians blank that this tulip mania was the first historical instance of an asset bubble, which occurs when investors drive prices to highs not supported by actual demand. Okay. So we're being asked, what kind of tense is this? Claiming is the gerund. Some historians claiming we don't have anything that would put this in the gerund. After that, we would need to either see something that says historians claiming that this was the first thing have been refuted, right? B, simple present tense is good. That is correct. B is what we're looking for. Historians are acting in the present and kind of a universal, right? So even if they were saying this in the 70s, this is still the historical claim. This historical claim hasn't changed, right? It isn't changed that these historians are making this claim. Maybe if the first claim was made yesterday, the claim is still valid today. So we can use the present tense even if it started in the past, in the same way that I am Rio, and I was Rio yesterday too, and I was Rio the day before. Because I am still Rio, I use the present tense. C, some historians having claimed that so this having claimed, we're getting some weird progressive tense here. Doesn't make any sense. To claim is the infinitive. Also, the infinitive does not work here. So we're looking just for the simple present, because the simple present can work in the present even if it started in the past, depending on the context. Like, I am Rio. Okay, so 19 is a sentence structure question here on the writing portion of Module 1. We are trying to see how we can connect these unwieldy things. So researchers studying magnetosensation have determined why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field when searching for food. Okay. So seems like, I don't know. Okay. Searching for food. Then we get an explanation of what they claim. In the northern hemisphere, the magnetic field points down into the ground, but in the southern hemisphere, it points up toward the surface and away from the worm's food sources. So they're moving against the magnetic field because it wouldn't serve them well. So we're being asked, what can combine these unwieldy things? So our answer is A, because A creates what we would call an elaboration. Okay. Elaborations, if you are unfamiliar with them, are kind of like a non-essential phrase, which we put within a pair of commas, but they're tacked onto the end of a independent clause or a sentence using either a colon like we have here or a dash we'll see sometimes. Everything before the colon in an elaboration must be an independent clause. Do we have that criteria here? Yes. Researching to food or researchers to food is indeed an independent clause. What comes after does not necessarily need to be an independent clause. But it also doesn't need to be just short, right? We don't want to get caught in this idea that after the colon in an elaboration, we need something short. Comma for B creates a comma splice. Okay, so we cannot connect with just a comma and a dependent clause to an elaboration. That is a comma splice, which is a type of run-on sentence. C, we create a run-on, and D, we create a run-on, just natural run-ons without any punctuation. C and D actually also make the information of the sentence incorrect. It says that, I mean, if you think about it, C and D are both saying soil-dwelling roundworms move in the southern hemisphere, move in the opposite direction when searching for food in the northern hemisphere. Are they in the southern or the northern hemisphere for C or D? Can you tell? It isn't clear. It's made unclear by those run-ons. So A is the only one which creates the elaboration, which clarifies what's actually going on here. Okay, so 20, we have a simple question based around pronouns. We are trying to understand the number that is at hand here, number being whether something is plural or singular. Scientists believe that unlike most other species of barnacle, turtle barnacles can dissolve the cement-like secretions they use to attach blank to a sea turtle shell, enabling the barnacles to move short distances across the shell's surface. Okay, so as is usually the case with pronouns and number, we want to find what clarifies the answer later on. We're not just guessing, are these turtle barnacles singular or plural? I mean, barnacles is obviously plural, but we have they right there. So that means we can get rid of A and D. Now we have the difference between they use to attach themselves to a sea turtle shell, or they use to attach them to a sea turtle shell. Them, this is a kind of like we're looking between pronouns that refer to the self or not, right? Self, obviously. We're looking for the pronoun which does refer to the self. Them would be they use to attach them. The them would need to be a pronoun that is an object being acted upon by our subject. Okay, that is not the case. They're not attaching other things to a turtle shell. They're attaching themselves to a turtle shell. So we need the self invocation. Therefore, 20 module 1 is B. So for 21 here, we are being asked, how do transitional adverbs or transitions work with punctuation? Okay, so we're not being actually asked which punctuation is correct, or pardon me, we're not being asked which transition is correct because the transitions are all the same, though. We're being asked, how do we create a transition in this particular context? Okay. So in 1943, in the midst of World War II, mathematics professor Grace Hopper was recruited by the US military to help the war effort by solving complex equations. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though. As a pioneering programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age. Okay. So we know it's though, etc. Right? Let's define what functions we have being created by punctuation here. A, we have an elaboration. B, we have a non-essential phrase. C, we have independent clause. And so And then D, we have what's called a complex sentence. So D would suggest that what comes after, well, actually, kind of can't even see anymore. No, actually, D isn't a complex sentence. There is no comma there. It's just a complete run-on. So D we can get rid of pretty quickly. It's just a complete run-on, okay? C, everything that needs to come after this is an independent clause, and everything that would come before this would need to be an independent clause. Though, as a pioneering computer programmer, here we have an incorrect. Okay, this though would need to be in the previous clause for the previous clause to be an independent clause. And yeah, so everything that comes before the period would have to be an independent clause. Does not work there. B, as a non-essential phrase, we could take though out. So imagine this without though. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations as a computer blah, 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 blah. But that though is very functionally important as a transition. A, everything before the colon is an independent clause that can stand on its own. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though. Everything after clarifies what comes before. As a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age. That is how we would create the usage of that transition. Okay, so 22 is ultimately asking about possession and modifiers and where we would want them to be in order to make sense. Okay. In 1453, English King Henry VI became unfit to rule after falling gravely ill. As a result, Parliament appointed Richard, 3rd Duke of York, who had a strong claim to the English throne, to rule as Lord Protector. Upon recovering 2 years later, Henry started being king again, okay, forcing an angry, okay, so what we also have between the commas, so the comma after later and the comma after this idea, this insertion here, it's a list. Okay, it is not a non-essential phrase. If it were a non-essential phrase, upon recovering 2 years later, forcing an angered Richard, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, so we have also kind of like two dependent clauses with an independent clause. So we need to have an independent clause here, and we need it to be clear who forced or what forced an angered Richard away from the royal court. Okay. So upon recovering 2 years later, B, the reign of Henry resumed, suggests that the reign recovered 2 years later, not Henry, and that the reign's resumption forced an angry Richard away. C, while putting Henry in the right place, suggests that the reign is what is forcing an angered Richard rather than Henry, right? We want to clarify it is Henry's action. Henry is the subject, which is doing the predicate, the forcing, okay, which is doing the verb, not the reign doing the verb. D is bizarre. Therefore, we have A. Henry resumed his reign, forcing. So Henry did this, and then Henry did that. All right, so 22, we have A. Okay, so 23, we have a transitions question. We'll want to understand the relationship between the two things that are being transitioned between. Although novels and poems are considered distinct literary forms, many authors have created hybrid works that incorporate elements of both. Bernardine Evaristo's The Emperor Babe is a verse novel, a book-length narrative complete with characters and a plot, but conveyed in short, crisp lines of poetry rather than prose. Okay, so this is a claim or a statement, and this exemplifies that. So we're looking for a transition that demonstrates something which exemplifies. Okay, by contrast is contrast, obviously. That'd be like saying, however, this is an example of something that wouldn't, it's an opposite distractor. Secondly, also doesn't make sense, right? Secondly, would need to obviously follow a first. So now we're looking between consequently and for example. Consequently suggests that as a result of this claim, this then occurs. This is not a consequence of what first happens, rather an example that exemplifies what happened or what was claimed. Therefore, we can get rid of consequently and resolve to D for 23. Here at 24, Module 1, we have another transitions question. Let's go ahead here. We're looking to understand the relationship between the things we're transitioning between. In this case, we have an embedded transition, just like we did in question 23. At 2 weeks old, the time their critical socialization period begins, wolves can smell, but cannot yet see or hear. Domesticated dogs, though, can see, hear, and smell by the end of 2 weeks. This relative lack of sensory input may help explain why wolves behave so differently around humans than dogs do. From a very young age, wolves are more wary and less exploratory. So dogs and wolves are different. There's something that is different in their nature at 2 weeks old based on what kind of sensations that they can perceive. So we're looking for something that shows difference, or the word we usually use, what shows contrast. Oh, look, there's the word contrast, okay? So we're looking for whatever says domestic dogs, on the other hand, however, contrastingly, by contrast, okay? Accordingly means that they're the same, right? Or going along with something, so we would get rid of D. In other words, is simply put, putting something in other words, or restating or rephrasing something in a new way, which is not being done here. This is something very different, right? There's something very different between domesticated dogs and wolves. And B, for instance, is, like in 23, something which exemplifies what comes beforehand. So if domesticated dogs had the similar situation as wolves, or what came before domesticated dogs example was describing how domesticated dogs are better, maybe this third sentence came beforehand, we could maybe use something like, for instance. However, in this case, we're just comparing and rather contrasting wolves and domesticated dogs. Okay, we have a final transitions question here for Module 1, question 25. We obviously need to make sense of what is the relationship between the things that are being transitioned between. I like how we have a blank space, so we're not falling prey to kind of the suggestion of what was there before. Researchers Helena Milajevich Brandt, Lucia Santamaria, and Marco Tolny report that while mathematicians may have traditionally worked alone, evidence points to a shift in the opposite direction. Okay, so we're looking. Okay, let's just see what the next sentence says first. Mathematics are choosing to collaborate with their peers, a trend illustrated by a rise in the number of mathematics publications credited to multiple authors. Okay, so this is wanting to say that as time goes on, more and more, we are seeing collaboration in math. So we're looking for something which talks about, try not to use the word increasing because that's the answer, an increasing scale, okay? Something which is getting larger and larger. That also contrasts with what comes before. So similarly, doesn't really work. We're not comparing two similar things. We're showing an example of what comes before. For this reason is flipping the cause and effect relationship here. We do not have the cause is the evidence and the effect is the example. Rather, it's the opposite. So B flips the relationship. C, furthermore, would be to suggest that we're making another claim or another statement or providing another example or data point, but we're not providing another data point. We are just kind of showing the increasing scale. So we're going with D for 25. Okay, module 1, question 26 is the first of our two kind of weird notes compiling synthesis questions. Okay, these are an odd question type. Students might not like them, but they're simpler than we might think. Okay, so I would recommend maybe looking at the question itself first. We want to present the study and its findings. So any answer choice that we're looking for has to present both the study that the student has taken notes about and the findings of the study. So these are the notes. Pterosaurs were flying reptiles. Millions of years ago, they existed. In a 2021 study, okay, there's the study part. We need that. Anasoya Chinsami Turan analyzed fragments of pterosaur jaw bones in the Sahara Desert. She was initially unsure if the bones belonged to juvenile or adult pterosaurs. Using advanced microscopic techniques to determine that they had few growth lines, therefore they are juveniles. So this is the findings. Okay, and this is the study. All right, so our answer choice must include what the study was and what the findings are. All this other stuff, especially 1 and 3, are probably extra. This is wrong because we do not get the full picture, okay? We don't get the full finding. We get the study, but not the full finding. So that part is wrong. This talks about the study, but there is no findings. So only half correct. We're going to see a lot of half right distractors for these notes questions. C, again, we get really detailed about the study, but what's missing is our finding. D, we have the study, good. And we have the findings, good. As a result, D is the only one that has both of the criteria we need to get a correct answer. All of the other ones are half right or irrelevant distractors. Okay, so this is our final question for Module 1, Reading and Writing, question 27. We have another notes question, these kind of tricky questions that appear at the end of the reading and writing. Oftentimes, we either have an answer where we're not being specific enough or where we're being too specific. That's kind of what we're asked to be. We either want to be really specific or we want to be really general. In this case, I usually like to look at the question portion itself first. We want to compare the contributions to the March on Washington. Okay, so our most important or most prescient information in our notes is going to be how do they relate to the March on Washington specifically? Okay. African-American women played prominent roles in the civil rights movement, including at the March on Washington. Okay, we have the March on Washington referenced, but it doesn't talk about 2 women yet. Civil rights activist Anna Hedgeman, one of the march's organizers. Okay, Anna Hedgeman was an organizer, was a political advisor who had worked for President Truman. Civil rights activist Daisy Bates was a well-known journalist and advocate for school desegregation. We don't yet know what she did for the March on Washington. Okay. This is at the march, okay? She worked behind the scenes to make sure a woman was included in the lineup. And then Bates was that woman who spoke, okay? So we definitely need to know that in our answer choice, Hedgeman worked behind the scenes as an organizer, and Bates was one who spoke. Here, we have Bates, that's good. But what is missing for A? Hedgeman, right? Saying she contributed doesn't say how she contributed. right? We're not comparing how they contributed with A. We're just getting one example. So A is a half-right distractor, as is often the case in these notes. B, Hedgeman helped organize. Okay, good. While Bates, this is true, but it's irrelevant. Doesn't say what she did for the march. So we can get rid of B. C, Hedgeman worked behind the scenes. Okay, that's one thing we wanted, right? Up here. And Bates was the woman who spoke. Okay, so this has both pieces. So we like C. Let's make sure everything is wrong with D. Something is wrong with D, though. Here is all bad. This doesn't say what either of them really did at the march. Talks about their role in civil rights, but not about their role in the march. So we got to make sure we're staying as specific as we can be here. So our answer choice for 27 is C. That wraps up our first module for College Board Test 391. Okay, y'all, so now we begin module 2 of this College Board Test 391. We're looking at our first question here, another vocab question. As was the case on our previous test or previous module with vocab questions, a lot of times we're looking for the definition or a synonym elsewhere in the text other than the underlined portion. So Monica Lopez Ferreira and others at Brazil's Butantan Institute are studying the freshwater stingray species Potamotrigon rex to determine whether biological characteristics such as the ray's age and sex have some sort of effect on the toxicity of their venom. That is, to see if the differences in these traits are associated with considerable variations in venom potency. Okay, so what we're looking for here is the closest synonym to considerable. Disconcerting fits the context to a certain degree, perhaps, right? Maybe a really toxic stingray is certainly kind of disconcerting, right? No one wants a really toxic stingray. No one wants to get stung by a really toxic stingray. However, in the context of looking for something that is synonymous to considerable, disconcerting, which means worrisome, doesn't work. Acceptable doesn't work at all. And then imperceptible is interesting. So it's wrong, but it's one of those answer choices that I think maybe is the one that we chose if we got an incorrect answer here. And that imperceptible is an opposite distractor here. But if we're missing this prefix here, im, meaning kind of the opposite of perceptible, it's easy to think, an imperceptible effect, meaning a noticeable or important effect, okay? However, imperceptible means it's not registerable. It's not perceptible, not something that we can perceive. So the only answer choice where we see a synonym with considerable is D. Oops, is D. So our answer choice is substantial for question 1, module 2. Okay, module 2 of test 391, we're looking at question 2, another vocab question here. Again, we're looking for maybe a synonym or a definition embedded within the question, but first thing we want to point out, Luisenio, that's North County, San Diego right there. It's hard for me to shout out North County, San Diego because, I'm not about that, but Indigenous from San Diego, that's pretty cool. Jimmy Acuna, doing beadwork. She's also Wailaki, which isn't listed there, which is from Northern California. So California well represented. Second, the first module had someone from the Grossmont Union High School District, which I can really shout out. Went to Grossmont High School, astronaut Ellen Ochoa. Now we got another San Diego head. Crazy. Anyways, let's focus on the less important things here about how we get this answer choice of D. So critics have asserted that fine art and fashion rarely something in a world where artists create timeless works for exhibitions. Okay, so art is timeless, and designers periodically produce new styles. So it seems like fashion is sort of always changing periodically, whereas artwork is intended to be displayed eternally. However, Luisenio Shoshone Bannock beadwork artist and designer Jamie Okuma challenges this view. Her work can be seen in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and purchased through her online boutique. So it is both something that the public can buy and it's something that is in a museum. Okay, so this, we're looking for actually kind of something that describes this here, because we are saying up here that they rarely are doing the thing that Jamie Okuma does do. What does Jamie Okuma do? She puts them together. So we're looking for something that suggests togetherness. So prevail doesn't work here. Prevail means to continue. It's like persistence, things like that. Being persistent, that's a word you all know. You all think of yourselves as persistent. Every single one of you is persistent. It's crazy. I don't know. Must not mean much. Succumb, we also don't have to work here. Succumb means to sort of not fail, but finally fail, right? You hear it in the context of someone succumbing to an illness or succumbing to their wounds. It means that something that has been trying to defeat them finally does, right? This doesn't fit whatsoever. Diverge is probably the one you chose if you got this wrong, because it is an opposite distractor. Jamie Okuma's work definitely doesn't, the fine art and fashion definitely doesn't diverge from one another in Jamie Okuma's work. So if you think that her work is indicative or emblematic of fine art and fashion overall, then you might choose C. But diverge, of course, means to go in two separate ways. What this sentence is trying to say is that rarely do they come together, like they do with Jamie Okuma, who challenges that perspective. So we're going to go with D, intersect. Okay, so for Module 2, Question 3, we have another vocab question. And again, our approach is let's find something in the text that either defines or is synonymous with what is underlined, right? The missing underlined thing, we're going to look for something in here that it's kind of an indicated keyword that says, we're looking for a synonym of something that's in the text, or we're looking for the word that is defined by this thing in the text, okay? Scholarly discussions of gender in Shakespeare's comedies often celebrate the rebellion. So we're looking for a rebellion of the playwright's characters against the rigid expectations, something by Elizabethan society. They really could have just said rigid expectations of Elizabethan society, but decided to make it a little more complicated. Most of the comedies end in marriage, with characters returning to their socially dictated gender roles after previously defying them. But there are some notable expectations. Okay, so we're looking for something here that demonstrates going against social mores, okay? Because we have defying social gender roles, rebellion. So we're looking for something that shows that this here, this isn't a rebellion. We're not looking for rebellion here. We're looking for something that shows that these are the social standards being set by Elizabethan society. So a word that works like set. So interjected does not work here. Interjected means to step in, usually meaning language. You can interject during a speech. It's an interruption. interjected by Elizabethan society would be things that are interrupting. That doesn't really work when we're looking for a social more or a social standard. Committed is kind of interesting, but it's not correct. Okay. Um, you could maybe convince yourself that committed works here if you don't really know how committed always functions. Um, but committed by Elizabethan society would suggest that it's like an action committed by them, right? Um, which it isn't. Maybe committed to by the society could work as well, but that isn't what we're looking for here. Illustrated by Elizabethan society is also another one that we might look at and get hung up on, but it isn't correct either. Against the rigid expectations illustrated by Elizabethan society. The society isn't illustrating the expectations. The plays are in an inverse way illustrating the expectations. So we have a kind of reversal of the actual role of what illustrated means here. So looking for prescribed. Prescribed just like how your doctor prescribes things. This term isn't solely for pharmacists. It also means to be set out or to be established by, right? It usually is used within a kind of social expectations, social mores context. Um, it 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 generally means what is typically or what is set as a standard. Okay, so when a doctor prescribes something for you, they are setting a certain kind of example of things that you need to do. In this case, it is society setting a certain sort of example or role of what you are to do based upon gender. So prescribed is what works here. If you missed this question and you didn't know what prescribed means, and you chose something like illustrated or committed, the issue is probably just that your vocab is not strong enough, unfortunately, right? You're probably just going to need to be studying vocab more because you made all of the right decisions from a test strategy standpoint. You didn't fall for a distracting, kind of like too sophisticated word that you didn't know. And you found a reason why maybe illustrated or committed would work. That's about as good as you can do, or as well as you can do without having the vocab to just know that prescribed is the vocab word that works here. So as always an invocation from us, study your vocab. So for 4, we have on module 2, test 391, we have another vocab question. Again, we're looking for maybe a synonym or a definition in the text that aligns with what would be placed in the underlined portion. In studying the use of external stimuli to reduce the itching sensation caused by an allergic histamine response, Louise Ward and colleagues found that while harmless applications, a vibration or warming can provide a temporary distraction, such blank stimuli actually offer less relief than a stimulus that seems less benign, like an electric shock. And we have a lot of words here that help us out. We have, on the one hand, a synonym. So we're looking for a synonym of harmless. We're also looking for an antonym of benign, or I guess a synonym of less benign. So we're looking for something that means both harmless and the opposite of benign. As it happens, innocuous means relatively harmless. So there is likely the case that you don't know what the word innocuous means. If you miss this question, it's likely the case that you don't know what innocuous means. Innocuous comes from kind of basically innocuous, sort of being like noxious or harmful. And then in meaning without. Okay, the prefix in means without. So not noxious, not harmful, innocuous, non-harmful, or harmless, or benign. Okay. However, even if you didn't know what innocuous means, I'm hoping that we could get rid of some answer choices and still arrive to B as the correct answer, even if we don't know what innocuous means. However, if you don't know what innocuous means, you probably should be studying vocab. As always, we want to invoke that idea. A, deceptive. So while deceptive might describe this distraction, it does not describe what we're actually looking for, which is the type of distraction, the character of this distraction. Basically, if you put deceptive there, knowing that the stimuli is a distraction, right? You're kind of saying such deceptive distractions actually offer less relief. That's very redundant, okay? So while deceptive defines what the stimulus is, it isn't what we're looking for. We're looking for what describes the character of the stimulus, or what the stimulus's character is. See, novel. That means kind of like new or unexpected, not just a book. Doesn't make sense in the comparison sense, right? So the stimuli is relatively novel. You know, a vibration or warming is kind of a novel stimuli, especially it's definitely a novel treatment for an allergic histamine response, right? It's not typically what we do. Normally we give you Benadryl or something. However, it isn't the opposite of being benign, right? Or the opposite of being less benign. It doesn't have any relationship to benignness or harmless or anything like that. Finally, impractical. We're not finding it to be impractical here, especially since we're comparing it to something else. We could use the word impractical in this sentence by maybe saying such innocuous stimuli is actually impractical compared to a less benign stimuli or stimulus. But it doesn't work in this context. It doesn't describe the character of the stimulus. So that's why we're going to arrive to innocuous. Study your vocab. Okay, so Module 2, question 5, another vocab. I believe the final vocab on this test. We're looking for a word which is maybe defined by something in this text or has a synonym elsewhere, maybe an antonym elsewhere. The province of Zoconochco was situated on the Pacific coast, hundreds of kilometers southeast of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. Because Zoconochco's location within the empire was so something, cacao and other trade goods produced there could reach the capital only after a long overland journey. So we're looking for something that says far awayness, right? Remoteness. Hundreds of kilometers away. It requires a long overland journey. We're looking for something which connotes, remote or far. Or marginal. Okay. Unobtrusive means it doesn't stand in the way of anything. Doesn't really make sense here. Because it was so unobtrusive, because it was not stepping on any toes. Doesn't make any sense, okay? Concealed might be an answer choice you could be compelled by if you don't really know what many of these other words mean, right? But concealed means to be hidden. It's not hidden, it's just far. Something that is far is not necessarily hidden. New York City is very far from here, but it's not some kind of secret city just because it's far. It just takes a while to get there. Approximate means not definite. It's the opposite of definite, right? It did have a definite location. It was on the Pacific coast. It was a specific place, a specific province. approximate would work if, we were talking about maybe like a nomadic thing or something. I don't really know. It doesn't work. Okay. I don't think that any of those words were compelling, yet I understand if you missed this question because the word that is correct, peripheral, is definitely not a word that features in this form in our everyday speech. But it does show up in our speech. If I'm looking at it like this, I can see my screen. Why can I still see my screen? Well, because of my peripheral vision. On the margins, the far outsides of my eyes, give me vision. I can see my hands, even though my hands are way far away from where I typically see, which is in front of myself, right? Peripheral comes from Greek peri, P-E-R-I, meaning around, okay? So it's somewhere on the edges, somewhere on the margins. This province of Zoconochco is on the margins, on the very edge, the far round edge of the Aztec Empire. Peripheral means it's kind of out of the way, out there, means out there. Okay, so that is why D is correct. If you're missing this, you're probably just scared by a word like peripheral, meaning you got to study your vocab. All right, so for Module 2, Question 6 of Test 391, we have our first two text, so cross-text analysis question, where we're going to look at two texts and compare them. We don't want to get too lost here, all right? We don't want to get too lost in the baggage or trying to totally understand what exactly is the phenomenon or think, oh, I know a lot about worms, which is the topic here. We want to really just stick to the text, stay clean. Most animals can regenerate some parts of their bodies, such as skin, but when a three-banded panther worm is cut into three pieces, each piece grows into a new worm, blah, blah, blah. Researchers are investigating this. An especially promising discovery is that both humans and panther worms have a gene for early growth response linked to regeneration. Oh my God, this passage is suggesting that there is a discovery which might mean that we, like worms, can be cut into three and I could become three different Rios. Oh my God, really, really promising for this. As they try to learn more about our limited abilities to regenerate. Text 2, see if it's about the same topic. When Mansi Srivastava and her team reported that panther worms, like humans, possessed a gene for EGR, it caused excitement. Okay, these are the people that did this discovery. However, as the team pointed out, the gene likely functions very differently in humans than it does in panther worms. Womp womp. Perhaps it is a gene. The gene is like a switch that activates other genes involved in regeneration in panther worms, but how this switch operates in humans remains unclear. Based on the two texts, how would the author of text 2 what would the author of text 2 most likely say about text 1's characterization of Mansi's discovery? Okay, he would probably say you're going too extreme. It is not reasonable. It is not especially promising. Promising for what? To get us to regenerate, right? Progress to learn more about our limited abilities. It's not promising to undo our limited abilities. B is correct. Perfect, simple, nothing wrong with it. These answer choices, we want to treat them like a berry on a bush, right? Three of these, three of the berry bushes are poisonous and one is not poisonous, meaning you don't go around eating every berry you see, every berry that looks tasty. No one would do that. You would die, right? You only eat things which you know aren't bad. So we're looking at these answer choices. Anything is bad, we get rid of it. You might not think blackberries are the best berry in the world. You might be more partial to strawberries, but B is like blackberry. It works. It's good. There's nothing wrong with it, right? It's something you can choose. C, it is unexpected given that Srivastava and her team's findings were generally met with enthusiasm. Very confused there. That is the enthusiasm, right? Uh, they wouldn't respond to one saying, most people were enthusiastic when text one was really enthusiastic. And D, also an opposite distractor. They're overly enthusiastic. They're not unfairly dismissive. It's opposite. So our answer choice for this question here, 6, is B. Okay, question 7, module 2. We got a bit of a fun one. We are being asked to make sense of the main idea of a text. The text is a portion of a sonnet from William Shakespeare. So really, really close friends here. I'm weary with toil, I hurry to my bed. The dear repose for limbs with travel tired. But then begins a journey in my head to work my mind when my body's work's expired. For then my thoughts, from far where I abide, begin a zealous pilgrimage to thee, and keep my drooping eyelids open wide. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Some important things here. When we get an old poem or an old piece of prose, something old, we want to kind of translate it, okay? We want to make sense of what's going on. So Shakespeare is going to bed. He's tired as heck. But as he tries to go to bed, he starts really thinking. And in his thoughts, he goes to his best friend or a close friend. And going to this friend, he stays awake. He can't go to sleep. He's not able to fall asleep, right? His eyes are kept wide open. So this will probably get rid of some of the answer choices that we chose if we chose incorrect answer choices. A, the speaker is asleep and dreaming about traveling to see the friend. Okay, this is about right, except no, the speaker is not actually asleep. The speaker is kept awake by their thoughts. Okay, so yeah, they're definitely thinking about traveling to see the friend. But it's really the thoughts that are traveling to see the friend. So A means you are reading this without making sense of the portion that shows that this guy's just in his thoughts and is awake. B, planning an upcoming trip to the friend's house. You're assuming too much there. It's not, perhaps that's why he's up thinking about his friend, but that's not the main idea here, as far as we can tell. C, too fatigued to continue a discussion with the friend as if he were physically present means that he is not physically present. So no phones in 1609, no calling on my cell phone, so we can get rid of that. So answer choice, we have D. Right here, question 8, module 2, we are being asked to interpret kind of some details. We're being asked some details, command of evidence about a text, an older text. We really want to just interpret what's going on. So we've got Lewis Carroll's Sylvie and Bruno. It is a satire. A bunch of people are outside the room of the warden, and a bunch of people are roaring, but what they're roaring for, according to the narrator, is not clear. Some were shouting bread. Some were shouting bread, some shouting taxes, but no one seemed to know what it was they really want, right? They really wanted. So it's unclear to the narrator, which is kind of omnipresent and true, what's actually being said. All this I saw, or well, the narrator, the first person narrator who is not the warden. All this I saw from the open window of the warden's breakfast saloon, looking across the shoulder of the Lord Chancellor. Actually, sorry, the Lord Chancellor. What can it all mean? He kept repeating to himself. I've never heard such shouting before. And at this time in the morning, too. And with such unanimity. Okay, that's an important word here. Unanimity means unity, right? Unanimousness. Okay, is what unanimousness isn't the word. Unanimity means what you would expect unanimousness to mean. So the Lord Chancellor thinks everyone's saying everything unanimously and all at once and early in the morning. And in actuality, some are saying bread, some are saying taxes. We don't really know what they actually want. So how is he responding to the crowd? Well, he thinks they are unanimous, even though the crowd clearly appears otherwise. Okay, so that's why D is correct. Let's get rid of some. He asks, sure, but is this part right? No. Does he indicate any desire to speak to the crowd? That's not there whatsoever. And then the crowd's demands aren't clear, so we can't choose that as well. Okay, for question 9 here of module 2, we are being asked, it's kind of a weird question. We're being asked to sort of do the writing for this stimulus, for this prompt. Okay, so we are being asked to portray a particular character, Alexandra Bergson, with a deep emotional connection to her natural surroundings. So we're looking for emotional connection to natural surroundings. Let's see, all of these, we're not being asked which is nicest writing, anything like that. We're just being asked to connect natural surroundings to Alexandra's emotions. She had never known before how much the country meant to her. Okay, so we have her heart. So the country means a lot to her for this she who is Alexandra Bergson. Her heart was hiding down there with the quail and the plover and the little things. She felt the future stirring. Okay. She is feeling sensations like music, her heart, her future, all in nature. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. That gets us pretty close. Let's look at B. Alexandra talked to the men about their crops and to the women about their poultry. She spent a whole day with one young farmer, blah, blah, blah. She learned a great deal. Yeah, that's just random, very rote details. Not talking all, there's no emotion there, surely, so we can get rid of B. Alexa drove off alone. The rattle of her wagon was lost in the howling of the wind. But her lantern, held firmly between her feet, made a moving point of light along the highway, going deeper and deeper into the dark country. It's very evocative. It's very beautiful. It kind of has a sense of a note of emotion. But do we have any of the natural surrounding there? Dark country is maybe as much as we get. Nothing else of the natural surrounding. Maybe the wind, but of course, wind exists in a city too. So does darkness. D, it was Alexandra who read the papers and followed the markets, and who learned by the mistakes of their neighbors. It was Alexandra who could always tell about what it had cost to fatten each steer, and you could guess the weight of a hog before it went on the scales closer than John Bergeson, her father himself. What does this have to do with a connection to, this has a connection to farm life, to farm management, to making money off of a farm, and things like that. It has nothing to do with natural surrounding stuff. So this is the only one that has any natural surroundings. So A has that, and it has emotions. So A is the only one that works. Okay, for module 2, question 10, we have our first figure or table question of the second module. We have, let's just break down the table quick. We have a bunch of different languages, the rate of speech in syllables per second, and the rate of information conveyed. So this is how quickly do the sounds come out, and this is how quickly does the info come out, okay? Let's read the text. A group of researchers working in different places conducted a study to determine how quickly different Eurasian languages are typically spoken in syllables per second, and how much information they can effectively convey in bits per second. Okay, bits must be how much information. They found that although languages vary widely in the speed at which they are spoken, so the sound is spoken, the amount of information languages can effectively convey tends to vary much less. Thus, they claim that two languages with very different spoken rates can nonetheless convey the same amount of information in a given amount of time, Which choice best describes data from the table that supports the researcher's claims? So in this case, we are looking for an answer that shows two languages which are spoken at a very different rate. So Serbian or Spanish are spoken really quickly. Thai or Vietnamese are spoken relatively slowly. Okay. That nonetheless have a similar rate of information conveyed. So, I mean, especially I'd say that these two are spoken very differently in terms of the speed, but they convey about the same amount of information. So, looking for probably something that talks about that. Let's see what we have here. Among the 5 languages in the table, Thai and Hungarian have the lowest rates of speech and the lowest rates of information. That kind of refutes the researcher's claim, right? Which is that there isn't necessarily the biggest correlation between bits conveyed and sounds conveyed. B, Vietnamese conveys information at approximately the same rate as Spanish, despite being spoken slower. Oh, that's exactly what we were looking at. So B is good. C, among the 5 languages in the table, the language that is spoken the fastest is also the language that conveys information the fastest. Yeah, it's just not true for one, but secondly, that would refute kind of their claim. D, Serbian and Spanish are spoken at approximately the same rate, but Serbian conveys information faster than Spanish does. That's not too off, but we're looking to say that conveying information actually is kind of more of a universal baseline. And the speaking part is what varies more. B is what shows that most clearly. Therefore, 10, we have B. Okay, Module 2, question 11 has a little bit of an assumption. If you missed question 11 here because you didn't make an assumption that they're requiring you to make, that is kind of unfair a little bit, okay? So we are being asked to see if a finding lines up with the researcher's claim. So we got to be looking for a claim in this text. Psychologists have argued that experiencing awe, a sensation of reverence and wonder brought on by perceiving something grand or powerful, can enable us to feel more connected to others and act altruistically. Okay. Keltner and others claim to have found evidence for this effect in a recent study. Okay, here's another claim. Where participants were asked to either gaze up at exceptionally tall trees in a nearby grove, reported to be a universally awe-inspiring experience, or stare at the exterior of a nearby nondescript building. Okay, there's the little bit of an assumption, okay? Nondescript building, we're having to assume is not awe-inspiring. If you're out here being a, you know, kind of a devil's advocate kind kid, you're like, well, how come this nondescript building could not be awe-inspiring? Okay, sure, fine. However, we're just going to assume the people looking at the nondescript building are not experiencing awe, and the people who are looking at the trees are experiencing awe. We now want to find a finding after, so an experimenter spilled a box of pens nearby. We want a finding that the people who looked at the trees act more altruistically, which we also have to understand. We have to know what that word means. It means to help others. If you're missing that vocabulary, study vocabulary. This question's hard without the vocabulary. We need to find one which says, looking at the trees means people are going to help the dude who dropped the pens. A. Participants who'd been looking at the trees helped the experimenter pick up significantly more pens than participants who'd been looking at the buildings. Okay, so given that we're assuming that the building was not awe-inspiring and the trees are, but that helping this person pick up is altruistic, A is 100% what we're looking for. We described it before we even looked to them. Let's get rid of B, C, and D though. B, participants who helped the experimenter pick up the pens used a greater number of positive words to describe the trees and the building. That just means that these people are more hippies, right? That doesn't have anything to do with it. That That's an uncontrolled variable here. That's a confounding variable if that were true. So we'll get rid of B. C, participants who did not help the experiment pick up the pens were significantly more likely to have experienced a feeling of awe. Okay, that is an opposite distractor. If that was true, it would kind of refute the researcher's study or the researcher's claim. D, those who had been looking at this building were significantly more likely to notice that the experimenter dropped the pens than those who were looking at the tree. So noticing is not altruism. So that's not right. Also, it's an opposite distractor. So we're going to go with A here. All right, so we have another graphical figure table question here for question 12, module 2. We have agriculture and manufacturing compared between agriculture, manufacturing, and services. So these are employment sectors. And the percentage of populations in those sectors compared between France and the US over the course of 1800 to 2012. Right, so we're going to compare these trends. Over the past 200 years, the percentage of the population employed in the agricultural sector has declined in both France and the United States, while employment in the service sector has risen. Okay, we can see that's definitely true. Agriculture started out 68, 64%. Now there's 2 and 3% there. Meanwhile, services went from 13 and 14 to 76 and 80. Very, very similar numbers. However, this transition happened at very different rates in the two countries. This can be seen most clearly by comparing the employment sector by sector in both countries in certain years. So we want to see, where does agriculture change a lot more in one country than another, shrink a lot more in one country than another, and where does services grow a lot more in one country than another at a particular time. So looking at 1900, the United States dropped from nearly half in agriculture to barely over 10%. And France stayed at pretty much very similar levels, okay? Meanwhile, the US went from a third to half employed in services, while France went from about a third employed in services to a little more than a third employed in services. So from 1900 to 1950, they changed most dramatically. Our answer choice is A. So these other answer choices just simply don't show much distinction between France and the US, right? Like 1800 to 2012 was a huge difference between, how many people were employed in those different sectors, but it was very similar between France and the USA. Same for 1900 to 2012. Same for 1800 to 1900. The only time it changes very dramatically between the two nations is 1900 to 1950. Okay, so for module 2, question 13, we have another kind of rhetoric or claim-based question. We're being asked which would support a researcher's claim. So let's find where that researcher's claim is. So now we have researchers and we have archaeologists. So archaeologists claim that instinct as well as particular categorization is what helps you make sense of material that is excavated. A recent study, however, researchers, so this is who we're looking for, trained a deep learning computer model on thousands of images and found that it could categorize them as accurately as a team of expert archaeologists. Some archaeologists have expressed concern that they might be replaced by such computer models, but the researchers somehow claim this is highly unlikely. Which finding, if true, would support the claim that researchers make, which is that archaeologists will not be replaced by computer models? Okay, so something needs to show that archaeologists have certain skills that the computer model as is won't replace. So the answer choice, as you see on your test, is C. A survey of archaeologists showed that Categorizing pottery fragments limits the amount of time they can dedicate to other important tasks that only human experts can do. So here we are seeing that, oh, there are some things that only human experts can do, right? You cannot replace archaeologists entirely with computer models. They won't be replaced because they have certain expertise, things that they can do that computers can't do, which they now will have more free time to do. These other ones are not correct. A, okay, I can do it faster than archaeologists. That means you'll keep your job. That doesn't make sense. B, both of them fail, so why use the computer model is what B is suggesting. It's not really a good claim or a good support. And then D, archaeologists are poorly trained, so therefore they would never be replaced by computer models. That also doesn't make any sense. So if you're missing this, not sure. Probably read. Okay, Module 2, question 14. We have a logically competes the text question. These are kind of odd questions on this test. We want to basically make sure we understand the rhetoric and structure of the text before we finish it, okay? So although military veterans make up a small proportion of the total population of the United States, they occupy a significantly higher proportion of the jobs in the civilian government. Okay, well, let's see how this is explained. One possible explanation for this disproportionate representation is that military service familiarizes people with certain organizational structures that are also reflected in the civilian government bureaucracy. And this familiarity, thus, so we're not looking for our hypothesis on why this might be the case. You might be a budding social theorist or, something, but what we're looking for is how does the familiarity between military structure and civilian government bureaucratic structure appeal to military veterans? Well, A, as you know, is correct. It's appealing because it's familiar. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. B, alters the typical relationship. Okay, what is the typical relationship between military service and subsequent career preferences? We don't know what the typical relationship is, so how could we choose that answer? C, encourages non-veterans applying for civilian government jobs to consider military service instead. Non-veterans is not the topic at all here. Again, kind of a non sequitur. D, increase the number of civilian government jobs that require some amount of military experience to perform. This familiarity doesn't have anything to do with this. I'm sure there's a lot of civilian government jobs that require some military experience, or I don't know, maybe not. However, we're just seeing there is a certain familiarity between the organizational structures of the military and the government bureaucracy, so military veterans like it. Simple as that. So Module 2, question 15 is another question like 14, asking us to logically complete the text. You all have read this text. I'm not going to read this out loud to you. However, we are going to just very briefly discuss how this happened, what the text is about. It's talking about how foods with carotenoids are converted into feather coloration, and that these are different, that male birds are the ones that need this the most. Usually getting a bunch of carotenoids gets you darker, and that helps. However, there are some tanagers here who have deep colors that typically are associated with carotenoids without having extra carotenoids. So what do these findings show? As we know, the answer is D. So what does this mean? Well, by having a deeper color, deeper saturation without a carotenoid-rich diet, we also know that the carotenoids confer health benefits, which maybe is evolutionary fitness, right? That's what we have. C, we already talked about why this might be the case. This was because of possible health. B, why would this be the case if we are having microstructures that create a deeper color than a carotenoid-rich diet? And A, almost everything is true here except honest signaling. So this word honest here is just enough. Just one word is enough to make something wrong. And if something is wrong, we got to throw the whole answer choice out. And that is our final question for the reading section for Module 2 of College Board Test 391. Okay, question 16 for Module 2 is our first writing question on the second module. It is a punctuation question. Here we have the Alvarez theory developed in 1980 by a physicist and his son, maintained that the secondary effects of an asteroid impact caused many dinosaurs and other animals to die out. But it left unexplored that question of whether unrelated volcanic activity might have also contributed to the mass extinctions. So we are combining two clauses here. We have two independent clauses. This clause here and this clause here are both independent clauses. So we are being asked, how do we connect independent clauses? We have three options. We can either have a period. Are any of these options a period? No. We can also have a semicolon, but are any of these options a semicolon? No. Our final option is to have a comma and a fanboys, which we also call coordinating conjunctions, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. B has the comma and the fanboys with but, so it works. A needs a comma, so it doesn't work. C doesn't have a coordinating conjunction or a comma. D has the comma, but no fanboys. That's missing, so we can get rid of D. Therefore, the only answer choice which effectively combines two independent clauses using our option of comma and a coordinating conjunction known as fanboys is answer choice B. So question 17, module 2 asks a grammar question. It's asking us to conjugate the verb force. Okay. So the first sentence generally says that macaques in Japan, snow monkeys, more influenced by food availability than preference. Now here's the important sentence. Although the monkeys prefer to eat vegetation and land-dwelling invertebrates, those food sources may become unavailable because of extensive snow and ice cover. Some form of force the monkeys to hunt for marine animals in any streams that have not frozen over. So we are looking for something that is in the gerund. Okay, gerund is this ing, we have C. To force doesn't work in the infinitive. The infinitive doesn't work here because it needs to be conjugated, and to force is not conjugated. Forces would be correct if the present tense was being forced. However, it is not. Let's see where exactly we. If we had the word which before forces, we could use forces. D, forced. If the monkeys no longer are around, if winter no longer occurs in Japan, then we can use the simple past tense. But because this is something which is ongoing, we need to use our gerund. Therefore, C, forcing. Okay, so question 18 is a tense question, ultimately another verb kind of conjugation question, but really it's ultimately about tense, okay? I'm not going to read the whole sentence here. I'm just going to really show us what word gives away this really, really clearly. today, Pike is considered the first video artist. Okay. Today is the literal most present tense you can get. So you can only use the present tense here. Had been, will be, was. These take place in A, the future, B, a sort of past progressive, or actually, yeah. C, simple past. But with D, this is the only present tense here. Today, this is the thing. Now, because the Korean American artist Nam June Paik was showing these things in the past, has no impact on what, I mean, it has an impact on how he's viewed today, but it has no impact on what tense we use to describe things that are happening in the present or today. So we have to resolve the D for 18 is. Okay, so for question 19, we have a punctuation question. We are being asked to make sense of what kind of clauses are at play here and how do we connect these types of clauses. Ultimately, I'm not going to read through this whole thing for you here. You already read it. You also know what the correct answer is. We have two independent clauses. Prior to VisiCalc's release and going on, is a complete independent clause on its own or contains an independent clause, and so does what comes before about the first computerized spreadsheet. So how do we connect to independent clauses? We discussed this up on question 16. So if you missed this question, you might want to check out question 16. But we really have three options. We can either use a semicolon, we can use a comma and a fanboys coordinating conjunction. We need both of those, okay? A comma and the fanboys. Or we can use simply a period. So A is a very simple run-on sentence. There's no attempt to combine these two independent clauses in any way, shape, or form. B and D both go halfway for the comma and coordinating conjunction option. B has the comma, but it doesn't have the coordinating conjunction, creating what we call a comma splice. D has the coordinating conjunction, but it's missing the punctuation mark of the comma. Therefore, it's just a run-on. So C, sometimes periods, they're not as fancy in our mind for some reason, but they get the job done. They show very efficient delineation between two ideas. That these two ideas are related doesn't mean that they have to be in the same sentence. They could be in the same sentence if you used a semicolon here, but you don't need one, right? Because they're both contain independent clauses. So for question 20, we have a verb tense question. We're being asked to conjugate a verb into the proper tense. The verb here is create or to create. The infinitive, we are basically trying to see what is the tense that we need here. So we always want to look at what surrounds it, either in the context of that sentence or above and below. Do we have anything that's already conjugated? So would increase puts us in the subjunctive. That means we want a present tense. So if we do this, then we would this. Okay? Create. Present tense is what we want. It is not in the past tense, certainly in the hypothetical, right? The and there, the conjunction and is what makes creating not work. We could use a comma instead of the and use creating in the gerund form, but that's not what we have. We have and. And creates is something that would be happening, or creates is wrong on the basis of number as opposed to simply conjugation on account of tense. So it's in the right tense, but it's the wrong number. But B is the right tense and the right number, present. So we're going to go with B. Okay, so 21 has two parts to it. First, we have the punctuation as an elaboration. So we need to make sense that we have an elaboration here, meaning there's something tacked on to an independent clause, And this thing that is tacked on is describing what comes preceding the tack on. We create elaborations using either a colon or a dash. So the last thing we need a colon, okay? So C is lacking a colon or a dash, so we can get rid of C. That moves us on to our next stage. What are we looking to describe? So an elaboration needs to describe the thing immediately preceding it. So do these problems describe plastics? Or, sorry, pardon me. Do these two things that come after the colon, do these two things in the elaboration, do they describe plastics or do they describe problems? Okay. Um, so they describe problems. A is wrong as well because one, despite being cheap, versatile, and easy to produce, there are two problems, right? That's suggesting that being cheap, versatile, and easy to produce are two problems. We have a misplaced modifier kind of quote problem created by A. And then B suggests that problems are associated with commercial plastics. That's the wrong way around, right? The problems aren't associated with commercial plastics. The plastics are associated with particular problems. Um, the two problems associated with commercial plastics would need to be kind of like worldwide sort of considerations, if that makes sense. So because it doesn't have any misplaced or dangling modifiers, and because it properly creates an elaboration, our answer choice is D. So for 22, we have a kind of hidden non-essential phrase question, or that it's asking us, not do we know how to create a non-essential phrase, but when are we actually needing them, or when do they take place? So I'm not going to read, or I'll read the second sentence here. In a pivotal 2007 article, plant cell biologist Yuri Lee showed that lipid molecules called I'm not going to read that. Okay. Plant cell biologist Yuri Lee. That is all the same noun. Okay. Because that is all the same noun, we cannot separate any part of that noun from itself. Okay. So we cannot have any commas between plant cell biologist and Yuri Lee. So we can get rid of A and we can get rid of D on account of that. So now we're asking ourselves, and let me erase this so you can see this clearer. We're asking ourselves, do we want to create a non-essential phrase with a pair of commas between plant cell and Yuri Lee that we could take out of this sentence and the sentence still be as effective and efficient as possible? B would create that non-essential phrase, whereas C wouldn't. So let's read it as though we don't have that, as if we were creating a non-essential phrase, and let's see if it works as a sentence on its own. In a pivotal 2007 article, showed that lipid molecules, okay, that just doesn't work, right? We need to know the person who showed this in order for it to be conjugated as showed. If in was gone and it said a pivotal 2007 article showed, then actually plant cell biologist Yuri Lee would be a non-essential phrase. You'd probably also want to have written by. Okay, that would be non-essential in the same way that, my teacher, comma, Rio, comma, is making a video for me to know to learn about the digital SAT. Would be a non-essential phrase. But here, plant cell biologist Yuri Lee is essential because that is what shows, that is the thing that's happening inside the pivotal 2007 article. Okay. So C, we do not want to have a non-essential phrase here, and we don't want to break up the singular noun of plant cell biologist Yuri Lee. So for 23, we have a transitions question here. We want to make sure that we understand the relationship between the two things that are being transitioned between. So usually sentences or clauses. Um, and then which word or which transitional adverb or transition or whatever we want to call it most effectively demonstrates that relationship. Okay, so we want to find the relationship first and then the word that is associated with that relationship. Small flat structures called spatulae are found at the tips of the hairs on a spider's leg. These spatulae temporarily bond with the atoms of whatever they touch. We're looking for something like therefore, okay? Blank, spiders are able to cling to and climb almost any surface. So we have a cause and effect, okay? So the cause, we have a temporary bonding, the effect, clinging and climbing. So we have some particular cause and effect transitions that show that relationship, okay? We have therefore, thus, consequently, etc. Which answer choice is in that category of transitions is as a result. Okay. If you're missing this, you probably want to look into the definitions of your transitions so you can make sense of what are these relationships. These other ones, however, is a contrasting, right, pivoting transition, which we don't have here. Similarly, is showing a similar example or something like that, but this is cause and effect, so not similarly. For instance, is an example of something rather than a cause and effect. So, for instance, exemplifies. You want to look at those categories and find the definition or the words which fit those categories if you're missing a question like 23. Okay, so for module 2, question 24, we have a transitions question. And just like 23 and any other transition question that we'll be doing on the College Board SATs, we will want to make sure we know the relationship between the two things that we're transitioning between. Okay. Once we find that relationship, we want to then find the word that fits in that kind of category. So before California's 1911 election to approve a proposition granting women the right to vote, activists across the state sold tea to promote the suffrage cause. In San Francisco, the Women's Suffrage Party sold equality tea at local fairs. Blank, in Los Angeles, activist Nancy Tuttle Craig, who ran one of California's largest grocery store firms, distributed votes for women tea. So both of these are examples of women's suffrage groups or women's suffrage characters using tea as a way to support women's suffrage or to advocate for women's suffrage. So we want the transitional category that shows exemplification. Okay, I don't know if that's a word, but that shows exemplify, right? Like that shows that we're building on showing that this is an example of this and this is another example of this. Okay, the answer choice which is in this category is similarly. In other words, suggests putting it in other words. Okay, suggests putting it in a new characterization or a new interpretation, what have you. These are not different, San Francisco and Los Angeles examples. Um, for example, doesn't work because the Los Angeles example is not an example of the claim or of the phenomenon. For example, would work before in San Francisco. Or if the in San Francisco sentence is gone, for example, would be a great transition between our first sentence and this in Los Angeles or in San Francisco sentence. That'd be great. But we're looking for something that just basically says additionally. Similarly is the best there. To conclude would be to say that this is kind of like a culmination of other building things, which doesn't make sense here either. You definitely want to study your transitions categories if you're missing this question. Okay, 25 is the first of 3 of these kind of notes, synthesis questions, note-taking questions on the second module for this. So module 2, 25. We want to make sure that we're not getting lost in all of the notes that are given for us. We're usually being asked something just very specific. We're being asked to ignore some notes. We're researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Saikan tunnel is a radial tunnel, blah, blah, blah. Where I actually want to look first for questions like this is what are we being asked? Compare the lengths. Okay. Saikan tunnel, 33 miles long. Channel tunnel, 31 miles long. All right, so we're looking to compare the lengths. So which answer choice says that the Saikan tunnel is 33 and the channel is 31? This doesn't work because while we have, this is not actually comparing them. While it mentions length, it doesn't have anything to do, and it also misses Saikan. This one is missing channel, so it's half right. And while this compares Saikan and channel tunnel, we don't get anything about length. B is good because we have the length and we have both tunnels. So therefore, 25B. If you're missing this, you're likely just moving too quickly or not paying enough attention. For these notes-taking questions, we're looking at Module 2, question 26 here. I oftentimes like for us to look at the actual question first, okay? The student wants to provide an explanation and example of Flana, okay? So we're looking to then have Flana defined in the notes. We'll find that note. And we're looking to have an example of Flana in here, okay? So there's a bunch of notes. All these notes might be helpful. All these notes are true, right? But we're really only looking for the notes which would explain Flana, so define it, and which provide an example. So John Ching is a Los Angeles-based painter. We don't really need that. Flana describes plant-animal hybrids. So John, that he depicts. Okay, so John Ching is important here. So Flana means his definition for his plant-animal hybrids. This is also kind of an explanation. We'll see if we need this. Here we have a parrot with leaves for feathers, and here we have a snow leopard whose fur sprouts flowers. Either of these are an example of Flana, so we could use either of them. We don't need necessarily both. So for A, we have the Flana part, right? But what is missing, class? You all were here saying it. I'd hear a chorus. The example. Right? There's no example. Great job. I'd go like this. Great job. B. We have the definition. Okay. The explanation of what Flana means. Up to there. And then we have an example. B's looking real good. C does nothing that we need. Doesn't explain Flana, doesn't provide an example. And then D, we don't really get an example. We get kind of an explanation, but it's not good. But the example is not there. We have example of paintings which have examples, but we're not given an actual example of Flana. So B is our only correct answer for 26. So Module 2, question 27, the final question of College Board Reading and Writing 391. We have a notes-taking question. I like to usually look at what the notes question is actually asking first. We want to emphasize the uniqueness of Taylor's accomplishments. So we don't know who Taylor is or what they're doing, but we want to emphasize something that is unique. So in the midst of the U.S. Civil War, Susie Taylor escaped slavery and fled to the Union-occupied St. Simons Island off the Georgia coast. Okay, I don't know yet if that's unique or not. Okay, it's damn impressive and very interesting, but we don't know yet if that's something that no one else was doing or very few people were doing. She began working for an all-black army regiment as a nurse and teacher. That's also very interesting, but again, we don't quite know if that's unique. She published a book about her time. Awesome. Okay. We don't yet know if that's unique, but then we see here, her book was the only Civil War memoir to be published by a Black woman. All right. In 1902. That's where we see, clearly unique. That's clearly the unique thing. This is still available to readers and printed online. Awesome. The thing that we know for sure to be unique is that this needs to be in our answer choices. So let's see which of our answer choices has this note. That note is not here. It's not here. And while it talks about the time she wrote, it doesn't mention how it's unique. We want to emphasize that uniqueness. The only one which mentions that she's the only person, the only Black woman to have published a Civil War memoir is answer choice D. Therefore, that's what works here. If you're missing these notes questions, you're either moving a little too quick or you're getting too lost in all the minutia of these notes rather than focusing solely on what we actually really need according to the question. With that, we are concluded with test 391 by the College Board. Good job.